Welcome to Reimagining Miami Gardens. In this groundbreaking podcast dissertation, we examine the profound impact of leadership on government with a specific focus on how it shapes the city of Miami Gardens. Through insightful interviews, in-depth analysis, and compelling narratives, we uncover the intricate dynamics between leadership and governance, highlighting the transformative power of effective leadership in shaping the trajectory of a city. Join us on this enlightening journey as we explore the role of leadership in driving positive change and development in the now vibrant community of Miami Gardens.
Welcome to Reimagining Miami Gardens podcast. I'm Oliver Gilbert III, chairman of the Miami-Dade County Board of County Commissioners and the former mayor of the young and vibrant city of Miami Gardens. And I'm excited to dive into the complexities of leadership in driving positive change in cities. Today, we embark on a journey to explore the challenges and opportunities faced by newly formed cities, such as the city of Miami Gardens, in their quest for transformation. In our study, we aim to address the pressing issues that hinder city progress, from bureaucratic obstacles to limited resources and the critical role that leadership plays in overcoming those challenges. The purpose of our research and discussion on this podcast is to uncover the strategies employed by city leaders to drive successful city transformation initiatives and provide insights into the essential elements of effective leadership in urban development. Join me as we navigate through the intricacies of city management through policy and administration, examine the importance of collaboration and strategic decision-making, and uncover the valuable lessons learned from successful city transformation initiatives. Together, let's explore the transformative power of leadership in shaping the future of cities. Now, in this episode, we discuss crisis management and dealing with issues that can have far-reaching implications and shake up the community. Joining me today is Theresa Therilus, or we call her Therilus, the former city manager of North Miami and a current chief operating officer for the county commission. She'll be helping me by leading this discussion. Theresa?
Chairman Gilbert, thank you for having me on the show. All right, let's get started. On a previous episode, we discussed safety in the context of policing and suppressing crime. However, in this discussion, I'd like to talk about handling a major crisis. Specifically, let's discuss a major crisis that dealt with policing in the city. In 2015, there was a major police-involved shooting. Can you walk us through the events surrounding that shooting in Miami Gardens, particularly the initial response and communication with the community?
It was interesting. That was a very, very, very challenging time. It was a very challenging situation. And it highlighted a lot of issues that we'll get into. One, not the least of which was mental illness. And actually, I'll start there because it starts when we get a 911 call from a mother who says she's in her room, and if he gets in, he's going to kill us. If he gets in, he's going to kill us. And so, as police officers are prone to do, we respond. When the officers arrive on the scene, someone attacks one of the officers from behind with what looked to be a broom handle that had been sharpened like a spear, rendered the officer unconscious, and then attacked the other officer who arrived a moments later. The other officer, based on the video and the evidence, gave verbal commands: stop, stop. The other officer tried to engage in physical contact, a physical altercation. He tried to fight him. He could not subdue him. He tased him, but the tasers bounced off because he was very sweaty and he was in a kind of a state that did not allow the tasers to actually physically to attach to him. And then in the end, when he couldn't, he actually fired, and he fired fatal shots, killing him. And so it turns out that the young man had a dual diagnosis of bipolar and schizophrenic. And he had struggled with mental illness his entire life. But when it came to the community, what they saw was a white officer shooting, killing a black man who they said was armed with a broom. So it became a kind of flashpoint. Before the whole movement, we dealt with it in Miami Gardens.
Before the George Floyd movement, yeah.
Because, Miami Gardens is the largest predominantly black city in the state of Florida, the third largest city in the county. So it was, and at the time, we had a police force that was around probably 45% black, which is still large for any sizable police force because only, 15% of law enforcement nationally are actually black. So if you get to 45%, you've done extraordinarily more than the national average. So it was, I remember because the news was everywhere. And then you got the protest groups that came and protested City Hall, and they all insisted at the time, no, we need to arrest the officer, arrest the officer, arrest the officer. I remember my first statement about it. My first statement was, I believe that we should always assess the facts before we form our opinion. So if it comes to a point when I feel like the officer violated his training or the law, if it's just his training, he'll be terminated. If it's the law, he should be prosecuted. But I won't assume that because it ended with someone dying that he actually broke the law or that he violated his training. And so that is a good rational statement, but it's not necessarily something that when people are filled with the emotions and that they actually want to hear. So I saw largely my part in that situation is to calm it down, like bring down the temperature. Because ultimately, I'm elected by the community, the entire community, and I'm responsible for its public safety. But I'm also the person who's elected to run the city. And so we need to be able to still keep our police officers' morale up. At the same time, we need to make sure one of our officers didn't do something wrong, and we need to make sure that we can bring the community along in this process. And so that was the police-involved shooting.
So talk to me about like the specific actions that you took to address the concerns first of the community who may have felt that this was a racially motivated incident.
Back then, the law didn't require us to show the family or the family's representatives things like autopsy reports and pictures and videos at the time. One of the things I did was I brought the mother, the family, their lawyers in. I sat them at a table with my police chief, my city manager, myself, and I said, this is what we have, and I let them see it. And I said, I don't expect you will agree because your son's dead, but this is what we have. And then when asked about it, I said, no, I'm going to show them everything. The law doesn't require it. I'm going to show them everything. We'll be absolutely, completely transparent because ultimately, I'm not here to protect an officer or convict an officer. I'm here to assess the situation. And if the situation is assessed that he violated his training or the law, appropriate actions will take place.
How do you get the family to come in and sit with you and watch the video of an incident?
Well, it was strange because the mother was the person who called the police. It was the mother who called the police. Her and her partner, he was trying to essentially do harm to them, according to her. So she was the person who called the police. She was the person who said she was in fear for her life. So it was strange because now she's dealing with the obvious guilt of understanding that I called the police to my house, telling them I was in fear with my life, and it ended with my son dying. And so I understood that grief. I also understood the nature of agitation. So people who want to agitate situations aren't necessarily interested in the facts. But if you present the facts to them, you have something going for yourself. You have, independent of the agitators, you have the vast majority of people who are fair and open-minded. He said, well, hey, listen, he's showing you what he has. They're not hiding anything. We're not covering it up for a police officer. This is it. This is what the body cam showed. This is what the recording showed. This is what the police cars video. This is everything. This is everything we have. We're going to send all of this to the state attorney's office and to FDLE. And if they decide to charge the officers, they will. But as far as we can tell, the matrix of force that he used, he first gave verbal commands. They weren't heeded. He tried to use physical contact. It was unsuccessful. He tried to use non-lethal force. It was unsuccessful. And when someone's coming for your gun, that's it. Because if he loses control of his gun, it's not just his life and his partner's life. His partner is already unconscious. His colleague is already unconscious. But possibly the people who are in the house and possibly other people in the community. And so sometimes bad things happen and the law isn't broken and training didn't go awry. Sometimes bad things happen. And speaking with it to that in that calm voice, understanding, listening to them, understanding the obvious pain that the family is in. The obvious pain. I didn't want it said that we didn't show them. We offered, they came, they sat. Now, after they saw it, that didn't make them feel better. But what it allowed us to do is say, hey, well, this is what it describes. You can draw your own conclusions. We're turning it over to FDLE. We're turning it over to the state attorney's office, and it's going to be what it is. Ultimately, the officer wasn't charged, and he didn't violate his training. It was just a bad situation.
There have been many of other incidents that have happened in other cities, quite the same, and sometimes they take their investigation internal. What was your thought process in terms of making the decision to have an internal or an external investigation?
I was with FDLE. I wanted FDLE to do it. I believe that police departments can investigate themselves well, and they often do investigate themselves well. I don't think it's the nature of their investigation. I think it's the nature of perception. People don't perceive police officers who are in an agency investigating police officers who are in the same agency as being effective. And so I didn't want that belief. I didn't want people to think that, yeah, they're just investigating themselves and they'll cover it up. I didn't want that belief. I wanted people to understand that we'll pass it on. I'm not afraid of judgment in this matter, because ultimately, if you'd done something wrong, you'd done something wrong. And then I had an opportunity to point out to the public also that one of the things that I had done when I became mayor was sit down with our manager, who's over all employees, and our police chief, and I expressed the type of policing that I wanted, and they said, well, yeah, we'll try to get there. And I'd implemented, and paid for all type of training, training for folks with mental illness, community-based police training. It was just implicit bias training. We had paid for a ton of training, and what I said was, we're going to hold people accountable to these standards. And they expressed to me, well, it's difficult to fire a police officer. We fired a bunch of them. I said, no, if they don't maintain this training, because I want this city, I pay for professional policing, I'm going to have professional policing. That's what I'm going to have. And so I won't ever throw them under the bus for the the convenience of politics or appearance, but I also won't accept bad behavior and cover it up. And so I knew, they knew, the public knew that about me, but they also knew that about me internally, that I was going to have the courage to stand in front of the camera and say this officer did nothing wrong, if he did nothing wrong. By the same token, if he did do something wrong, I would stand there and say, we're turning this over to prosecutors, and I hope they prosecute. And things like that, that type of understanding of who I was, I think helped the situation. So the family was never satisfied. And the groups that came in to push the family to agitate, and they marched and they protested, they were never satisfied. But the public, the Miami Gardens voters, I run for re-election after that and win overwhelmingly, because I was fair with them, and I never deviated from the values that I'd always expressed, that if you break the law, you're going to be prosecuted. And that would apply to everyone, person and police alike.
No, it's easy to say, okay, I'm going to make decisions how I need to make the decisions. But in fact, in truth, there is an election to think about. So for this coming up on the heels of the election, when you first get the news, does any of that play into your decision making? And what were your thoughts in terms of, hey, I'm going to go into a new election cycle?
Honestly, no. It's so strange, because there's this idea of what people think about policing and their relationship with the Black community. And then there's the reality of your individual situation. So we like to, paint it with a broad brush. Every Black community relationship with every police department is exactly the same. But that's not true of every community. And so Miami Gardens, large working class Black community, and public safety was always their number one issue. And we had started to build really, really good relationships with the community and the police department. One of the things, Miami Gardens has its own police department. One of the reasons why Miami Gardens left Miami-Dade's police department was because they wanted more police officers. They wanted more interaction. They wanted to see them around more. They wanted quicker response times. So they were prioritizing public safety. So I was never confused about how they saw the police generally. And then, it also, the extenuating circumstances of that particular shooting, I understood that I could say, because everybody has someone in their family who's mentally ill, or they know someone who's mentally ill. They do. Everyone does. And so it, unfortunately, it's that prevalent. It gave me an opportunity to talk about how, right now, at that time, we were treating mental illness with our police departments. And so the appropriate people to respond to a situation like that, after police make it secure, because they have to be safe first, but was for folks to deal with this young man who was obviously in trauma through no fault of his own. Through no fault of his own, he was in trauma. And so, and that's when I say that, sometimes really bad things happen and there's no one you can actually blame. Sometimes really bad things happen and there's no one you can actually blame. But you have to have the courage to actually stand there, understand that, and be able to articulate it. And so when I'm making these decisions, I guess in my core, implicitly, I knew who Miami Gardens was, someplace I'd been my entire life and what they wanted and what they valued. But ultimately, I knew I had to get it right in the moment, because if I don't get it right in the moment, I have a police department who's going to have to police a population, and I can't have that powder keg, because powder kegs are susceptible to sparks, and it would never explode on my watch. And so I knew that I had to get it right.
Did anyone bring it up during your election? Did this come up at any point?
Yes. The mother came and protested against me at the polling places. She passed out literature saying he killed my son. And it was, it had death threats. People would sit on the sidewalk outside my house as though it was intimidating me. It was crazy. It was crazy. It was the primary campaign against me. Yeah, it was the primary campaign against me, and yet and still I won overwhelmingly, because I never deviated.
When you see someone sending out flyers saying you killed my son, what is in your thought process? Does it at some point kind of bother you? There's going to be people who are going to look at it and not know what happened and believe that.
No, I understood it. Listen, if I were in her position and I felt like my life was in danger and I called police, and the result of that call was an interaction that led to the death of my son, I would need to have somebody else to blame. I would need that. Because you're not just living with the pain of not having your child. You're living with a subtle guilt that might become an overwhelming guilt that reflects your part in your child not being here. And so you need to blame someone else. I understand that. There needs to be some variable in the situation that had nothing to do with you, that bore responsibility for the incident. And I became that flashpoint. And so I've never harbored ill will against her, the family. Some of the people who agitated for the purpose of agitation, and the people who were involved in politics who tried to use it, I think less of them. But it is. I think that people have a right to be curious. I think people have a right to protest. I think that if you're doing anything and you have a genuine belief, I'm okay with that, because my beliefs are genuine. So if your beliefs are genuine and we can have a rational conversation, we can figure it out. I can, but that's fine. But when people are doing it for the purpose of political gain, it's not a genuine belief. So there's no way to talk through it. There's no way to rationalize it, because their goals aren't in fact genuine and authentic. And so those folks, I looked at it like with a side eye maybe. But the mom, the family, no, I understood it. When she was standing out there, I remember the early voting site, because I was out there campaigning, passing out my stuff, 12-hour days then. And she was out there, and everybody I talked to, she'd go talk to him, and she'd hand him a flyer to and say he killed my son. I mean, they voted for me.
Something to be said about there are parts of the communities that feel as though if they were to call the police, it doesn't work out for them. And so my question to you is, with that idea or narrative, how do you change that narrative of, hey, I called the police, I was looking for help. Instead of getting help, I got hurt somewhere in my family?
I mean, I think having better police-community relations, and I think they've worked on that, and we still work on that in Miami Gardens. I'm working on it in Miami-Dade County also. But sometimes because I'm a black man who's been a black man my entire life. And so I feel like I've been stopped an inordinate amount of times. I've been stopped while I was mayor. So I feel like I've been stopped an inordinate amount of times. So I understand the feeling of it. We focused on the interactions and the number of interactions that go bad, and we do so ignoring the vast number of interactions. So when people say, you know what, they always stopping somebody and somebody always gets shot, there are literally hundreds of thousands of interactions between black people and police officers every day, and everybody goes home safely. And so while I think that any incident is one too many, I can't just look at the one. I have to be able to analyze the broadness of the interactions, and so I can't judge them all based on or looking at it through this prism that, hey, the white officer was wrong, and the black man who was hurt or arrested or killed was right. I think they're fact specific. And I think the problem that we have in the community, and this is for the entire country, is we don't make them fact specific. You have one group of people who always think that the police is right, and one group of people who always think that the person who's harmed is wrong. And that's just not true based on the individual facts. So there are factual situations that lethal force would be authorized based on their training. And I don't say that like lightheartedly. It's heavy. It's heavy to carry that. I carried that as a prosecutor. I carried that, but that's true. It's true that there are times when the situation devolves to a point where lethal force is authorized. The goal is to never get there. And so you need some level of self-regulation not to get there. When people are incapable of self-regulating, as the young man was in this incident, it's difficult to explain to a family because they understand that he couldn't self-regulate. But as a community, a larger government, we have to understand that I can't ask that police officer to sacrifice his life or place himself in danger or other people in the community in danger because he can't self-regulate. So if we go through all of these modes of de-escalation and we work it all the way through the matrix where that's the only option left, and that's the only option left.
Let's talk about the media and how you handled the media in that. Generally, they like to keep the news going and flowing. What was your role in responding to the media and also trying to control the news cycle?
I did a lot of the talking. I was never and still not like an elected official or a politician that runs for cameras and press conferences. I genuinely don't do that. I see it all the time where something happens and people want to run and have a press conference. I don't do that. But I took the lead on this because I knew the messaging had to be right. And I wanted a level of transparency with the public to assure them that we didn't have a police department that was just out there, killing people willy-nilly And we also understood. Like, we understood what the pain was. We understood what people were saying. And so I did that. And I knew that something else about me is I'm very disciplined when it comes to what I'm going to say. You can't talk me into answering a question the wrong way. If this is what I'm saying, this is what I'm saying. And I think for the purposes of this podcast, if you're in this situation, determine what your message is and put the person in front of the camera who will be message disciplined. You have to be disciplined on the message. This is what we're going to say. This is not. You can ask me the same question a million different ways. If I'm not going to answer the question, I'm not going to answer the question. If there are things I can't answer because there's an ongoing investigation, I can't answer. This is what I know. Telling them this is what I know. This is where they are in investigation. And these are the steps that we're taking. Now, you can ask me a question about anything I said, but the answer to your questions about anything I said, is going to be something I've already said. This is the body of information that I'm going to present to the public. And what I've seen in these situations before from other folks, elected officials and police PIOs and police chiefs, is the initial part was good. Like, okay, it was good. It was fine. But the questions got them off of the point, and they typically said something or did something that made the situation worse. And what we could not have, and I remember talking to Cameron, our city manager, about this, is that we can't have the situation get worse. We can't have the situation get worse. And so, because the other thing is, you know, the media is one thing, and the media and the public is one thing, but I still have to have a police force internally who, if the police officers know that they worked the training, they worked the matrix, they worked the scale, they did everything right, and something was and they think, well, you know what, they're not going to stand by us. You can't have a bunch of police officers who are just going to sit in their cars all day. You can't have that and have a city be safe. So there's more on the line than just this incident. You have to still be able to make the city safe, ensure the safety of the city. And so, you know, and everyone's listening to everything. So don't just assume that you're talking to the public or the protesters or the family. You're talking to, you know, potential jurors. You're talking to the police department. You're talking to other city employees. You're talking to everybody right now when you open your mouth in front of this camera. So you need to be cognizant of that. And you need to, you know, have a position that has been informed because you've listened to folks. You need to be empathetic because someone's child is dead. And if it's your child, you'd be heartbroken. You need to understand that part of your job is to actually heal the community. Because when something like this happens, there's a fracture, there's a break. How do you bring it back together? Because ultimately it's going to be one community. And it's going to be how you envision it. It's going to be through your leadership.
So generally coming and speaking in front of the media, do you come with notes? Do you come with how you figure? What do you do when you're coming in front of the media? How are you prepared for that?
I don't generally use notes. Well, I don't use notes to speak in generally ever. But if it's a prepared speech, I'll do. You know, I'll write my speech out and type it up. I'll teleprompt it. But I write it, so I'm very familiar with it. But no, when I'm doing press conferences, I don't do notes. I just go and talk to them. I decide what I want to say, and that's in my mind. And I'm going to go and I'm going to talk to them about it. And so it's one of those things. I know a lot of times my friends and colleagues, they look at me like I'm crazy because they do notes. But it's I guess I can do it that way, so I do it that way. But also, I just think it's more authentic when you're not reading a response. So I'm not reading a statement. I could put a PIO out here to read a statement to a bunch of reporters. But when people want to hear from the mayor, the elected leader of their city, they don't necessarily want about something like this. You know, I'm not memorizing numbers or explaining the budget. No, it's not. This isn't explaining the budget. This is talking about something that happened and beginning the process of healing the community and explaining where we're going as an organization and the investigation of what happened. You don't need notes for that. If I have to read that says something to the person who's watching me, like it might not be my words. These are my words. These are my words. This is how I see it. A manager didn't write it, a lawyer didn't write it, the police chief didn't write it, unions didn't have to approve it. This is what me, the mayor, the person you elected, this is how I see it. This is what we're going to do. And so if you can't explain your own thoughts like that, then without notes, I think that sometimes people might not think it's genuinely yours.
So a lot of times people bring in crisis managers when there's issues. How do you feel about crisis managers, and what are your thoughts in terms of how they might be helpful or may not?
I mean, if you feel like you need one, you can do it. I was crisis manager for my city. I think that crisis managers can be good. We've never actually used one. And so part of the reason why is I was the mayor of a city. And so crisis management implies that someone can come in and they can see a situation and they can tell you what to do. And that could be true, but I think that knowing the city is probably, and knowing the community is probably the most important thing. And so anything that they were going to do, I was going to have to be able to say, hey, my people won't buy this. That's ridiculous. And so you needed to be, I think there needed to be an authentic type of handling of this, and there was.
Let's talk about the officers, right? Because at this point, I can imagine that the police department itself is waiting to see how are you going to support or not support them. And what was your first contact with either the leadership of the police department or the police department as a whole? Did you ever address it to them specifically? And how did you handle that?
I remember telling them they have to keep doing their jobs. And I reminded them of who I was and who they were to me, and how, I was the person who had been a prosecutor for years. I was the person who had said, hey, we're going to start having a police force by sending kids from this community to the police academy to become police officers in this community. I was the person who, when they told me they needed raises, I figured it out. When they told me, I was the person who paid for training, I was the person who did all of those things. And so understanding what my values were with regard to how we police the community, understanding how I saw them and how I saw the community, and just speaking with that type of authenticity and consistency. And they had heard me say it before, the facts are going to be the facts. Don't let the facts be wrong. If the facts are wrong, if you do something bad, we're going to deal with you. And they knew, they understood that. And so when I was talking to the leadership, I was like, hey, listen, what are the facts? And they understood exactly what I was getting at. If the facts say that this officer did something wrong, then this officer did something wrong. I will not protect people who break the law. I won't do it. If you took somebody's life and it's not legally justifiable, I believe you should be prosecuted. But if you didn't, I don't think you should be fired or prosecuted or be called a racist. You did your job. It had an unfortunate consequence, but it was part of your job.
With the officer-involved shooting, how did that impact your approach to leadership? And what type of leadership did you use with the public and with the police?
Well, I think with the public, it was definitely servant leadership. The public, it was definitely servant leadership. When you think about it, the listening, the empathy, the healing, the awareness, the persuasion, conceptualization, foresight, stewardship, and understanding that we had to come and move forward together. That's what was needed. Like, because they had to feel heard. So sitting in there at forums with, the town hall meetings with the NAACP and hearing people say largely the same thing over and over again, that mostly wasn't factually based. And I remember getting a letter or someone sending a letter from the state NAACP saying bad things about the city. And I'm like, well, this is incredible because they don't even know the facts yet. How could you know that this was racially motivated if you don't know the facts? And so, but listening and understanding that people come to positions not based on the actual facts of what's happening in front of them, but based on what their lived experiences are. And so we all bring our lived experiences. And as we bring our lived experiences, we don't realize it, but they inform us. So if you live in a world where everything is racially motivated and you believe it is, no matter what it is, everything looks like a nail if you're a hammer. And that's what it was. But I understood that I had to actually listen, put myself in their position, empathize, I understood that that was necessary to begin to heal. And that healing was necessary to begin to move the community forward and past this. And so that was going to be the type of leadership that we had to show.
Off of leadership, but just kind of talking about the healing, how long do you think it really took the community to heal? Are they still healing from it? Where's the community now with something like that?
It's not talked about a lot now. You know, this was before George Floyd and the, you know, this was before all that. It's not talked about. And so we had gone through that before the country did. We had had that civil unrest in Miami Gardens before the country did, and we had dealt with it in a different way. So I wasn't surprised when we had that summer. You know, I wasn't surprised because we had had those conversations, very difficult conversations about policing and the community and black people. We had those difficult conversations. We had done that work already. And so that stuff, you know, from my perspective, we had already handled. I don't say we're past it right now. I say there's not a lot of conversation because I think that everybody is a part of the community. And I'm sure there's some people who are still like hurt because a young man's dead. And so that should always stay with us. We should never be completely past that. But we should also always still be moving forward.
With respect to the police officers, what was your leadership approach with the police department and that leadership?
I think it's probably ethical leadership. Because those are the values that I've been talking to them about generally. You know, the values that I saw in policing, how we were going to, how I saw this, how we were going to view the community, you know, how we were going to speak about the community, how I was going to speak about them, how I was going to talk to them, and honestly, just the virtue of being right and doing right. There's this thing, like it's in the Bible, do unto others as you had them do unto you. You know, and it seems very simple, but I always wanted, from a policing perspective, what if it was your child? What if it was your husband? What if it was your wife? What if it was your son? What if it was your daughter? What if it was your brother or your sister? What fairness, understanding, not just in a shooting perspective, but understanding every encounter. What even if they were wrong, what level of professionalism, what level of fairness would you want demonstrated for them? Sometimes the cuffs are going to go on and you are going to go to jail. But how you go to jail, you know, how you're arrested, how it's communicated, whether you're still, you know, shown a certain level of respect. What would you want for your mom or your dad in this situation? And that had been my consistent message the entire time. And then they had to understand that, because, and I get it, people always think, especially in police officer positions, that when bad stuff like this happens, they're going to throw the police officer under the bus. They had to understand that the same person I was before the shooting was the same person I was after the shooting. That when I said, if you're right, we good. If you're wrong, that's why we gave you all that training. We won't cover anything up. And so that type of understanding, that type of communication with them, and that relationship that had been done, you do that relationship work before the crisis. So the relationship had already been built. They knew who I was. And some of them liked me and some of them didn't. But they knew exactly who I was. The type of behavior I required, and if they did the right thing, I'd stand by them.
I think that's a really strong point, that it's important to have built the relationship before the crisis, and that it will definitely ring to how you get through the crisis by doing that. Some of your final thoughts.
I mean, every situation is going to be different. You know, for me, talking to the public, you know, it was servant leadership and the police department, ethical leadership. But if you go through a crisis like this, I would say the most important thing to do is understand that you have to be the calm in the storm. You have to find a way to be the calm in the storm. And everybody else is panicking. They don't need you panicking. They don't need you to talk about how the sky is falling. You need to be the person holding the sky up. Because ultimately, you're going to be the bridge to someplace better for the community and for the city. You have to understand that.
Thank you for listening to Reimagining Miami Gardens. Join us for our next episode as we dive into the leadership principles that guided the transformation of Miami Gardens into the vibrant city it is today. Until then,